We're continuing our coverage of breaking news out of Los Angeles. Mayor Karen Bass said the National Guard has not yet been deployed in the city after protesters clashed with law enforcement over immigration raids carried out by the Trump administration. Her statement comes after President Trump signed a memorandum deploying, quote, 2,000 National Guardsmen to address the lawlessness. And federal officials told the New York Times that troops will arrive in L.A. County within the next 24 hours. Max Boot and Anthony Coley are back with us, and also joining the conversation, Anne Applebaum, staff writer at The Atlantic and author of Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. Anne, thank you for being with us this morning. Would love to just get your overall thoughts here about not the specifics of what's happening in Los Angeles, but the conversation we've been having since the beginning of this show. And I think Max was pointing this out just before we went to break, the concern about the administration looking for excuses to escalate the situation and then do even more than what it's doing. Could you talk about that concern and how that plays into your knowledge and your expertise on what authoritarians do, what autocrats do in situations like this?
I think that's a great way to start thinking about it, because if you take a step back and if you look at what Trump and especially some of the people around Trump have been trying to do since winning the election, they've been carrying out what they think of as a revolution. They use revolutionary language. They talk about an assault on the administrative state. They used Elon Musk and his team of engineers to go into federal departments and to government departments to take over computer systems, to fire people en masse. You know, they're trying to create a major change, and their change is beginning to run into stumbling blocks, just like happens in all revolutions. And much of what they did turns out to have been against the law. Courts are beginning to push back on them. The public doesn't like what they're doing. Trump's tariffs are unpopular. And when you are in a situation like that, when you're running what you think of as a revolution, you often feel the need to escalate, to move to the next stage. You know, how can you suspend the law? How can you change the rules again? How can you create a situation of emergency that allows you to do whatever it is that you want to do more quickly? And what worries me about what we're seeing is it looks like this is the moment they've chosen to try to escalate. You know, a lot of what Trump has done since January has also been an attempt to go around the law, to ignore the law, to use a kind of fake emergency in order to impose tariffs and a fake emergency in order to deport people to El Salvador. This is another attempt to create a sense of emergency, the impression of emergency, so that the law can be broken. And that's what I hope people keep their eye focused on over the next few days.
And in that vein, it is the first time since 1965 that a president has activated a state's National Guard without a request from the state's governor. You have, that's from the Brennan Center of Justice. You have the governor of California saying this is an escalation, it's unnecessary, called it deranged behavior. How does that play into it, where you have the leader of the nation taking over something that the governor did not ask for?
I mean, look, it's against the very principles that the Republican Party used to stand for. They were believers in small government, in state rights, in decisions being made at the lowest level possible. This is not only a violation of at least the norms of the Constitution, and if not the law, and as well as the ideas of the people who make up what's currently the largest political party in America. So again, it's Trump seeking to overcome tradition, to destroy, or at least to undermine the rule of law, in order to leave himself more space to maneuver. And the question I would ask is, what is he going to do with this emergency situation? Why does he need this emergency? What is it that he wants to achieve with the suspension of law, starting in California and maybe moving to other places? And as your guests have been saying for the last several minutes, you know, we're not talking about mass demonstrations or violence. We're talking about a few hundred people in LA. So this is a constructed and engineered emergency. And what everyone should be focused on is, why are they doing it and what are they going to use it for?
Max, it really is something that Pete Hegseth jumped from National Guard to Marines at Camp Pendleton.
Right. This is not what you want in a situation like this, a trigger-happy Secretary of Defense. Now, I think one thing you can say in favor of the Trump administration is I don't think that they are looking for wars overseas. They're not necessarily looking to involve U.S. forces in conflict with Iran or other bad actors, but it does seem like they're looking for wars at home. They're looking for confrontations at home. And, this is very convenient for somebody like Pete Hegseth, who's had a bad first few months on the job where, he was involved in this Signalgate scandal where he was texting U.S. Attack plans to the editor of The Atlantic, as well as to a lot of his colleagues in the government and on an unsecured app. He's had massive turmoil in the Secretary of Defense office, people coming and going. He's been focused on culture wars, not on really preparing America for actual wars against actual adversaries. And from what we read, he has not been in good odor in the White House, that President Trump has not been happy with a lot of the stuff that he's doing, including when he wanted to give Elon Musk access to U.S. war plans involving China. And so this is an opportunity for him to get in Trump's good graces, to be on the same page as the White House and say, yeah, you're sending a National Guard, I'm going to send in Marines. It's completely inappropriate, and it's very, very dangerous because you should not be having active duty U.S. troops involved in missions on U.S. soil, barring some catastrophe, which has not happened here. And I think this is the key point. You're talking about dozens or hundreds of demonstrators. There is nothing that remotely would justify the deployment of active duty Marines to Los Angeles.